It's about to get very nerdy up in here. Hello fellow geeks and welcome back to Running Geek Girl. My name is Heather and I'm glad you're here today because I'm going to be covering a topic today that was suggested by a viewer just like you down in the comments. Today we are going to be talking about something that we have been taught to fear as the enemy, and that is lactic acid. Most of us have been taught to see lactic acid as the villain, that it causes the burn, it causes muscle fatigue, that it's the reason that we have delayed onset muscle soreness or DOMS. We've been led to believe that this is a waste product that we have to flush out of our system with a massage or resting your legs up against a wall. But latest research has shown that our bodies don't produce a substance called lactic acid when we exercise. It turns out that lactic acid, or at least what we used to think of as lactic acid, is just a myth. Our bodies actually create something called lactate, and we produce it not just when we exercise, but we produce it all the time. Not to mention that lactate is actually pretty good for us. As a runner, you've probably been told that lactic acid is produced by muscles during intense exercise and that the buildup of it causes muscle fatigue and that's the culprit for soreness after a long run or an intense workout. This is something that has gone pretty much unquestioned for over 80 years after they first linked lactic acid to exercise metabolism back in the 1920s. So how did we get this way of thinking for so long? There were two Nobel laureates back in 1922, A.V. Hill and Otto Meyerhoff, and they won the Nobel Prize in 1922 for their study of carbohydrate metabolism in working muscles. They noticed that lots of lactic acid was being produced just at the point where the muscles stopped functioning, so lactic acid must be the cause of muscle fatigue. So there's a couple of problems with that. First of all, Hill and Meyerhoff were working with frog muscles. Human muscles tend to have a much higher potential for endurance. And not only that, these frog muscles were cut off from the rest of the frog and isolated in a jar. And last time I checked, I'm able to enter a race with my legs still attached. So that's going to be a new supply of blood and a refresh in the supply of oxygen. So they were able to show a correlation, but not really a causation. So let's talk about what the truth is behind lactic acid. We're going to look at 3 myths that need to be debunked about lactic acid. Number 1. The muscle burn that you get during an exercise is caused by lactic acid. So for years, we have been told by coaches, trainers, teachers that lactic acid is what causes our muscles to ache and tired when we exercise intensely. The theory is that when the body breaks down glucose for energy, it produces lactic acid as a byproduct. And so researchers concluded that the accumulation of lactic acid and the increasing acidic environment in our muscles is what is causing the muscle fatigue and failure. But there's never been an experiment that really proved that. It's just correlative data. So ever since lactic acid was first linked to exercise metabolism in the 1920s, they just didn't question it for the next 80 years. A closer look at the biochemistry that's involved during exercise reveals a totally different story altogether. Now, we've always heard the term, you go until you feel the burn. And until recently, it was thought that the burning sensation during an exercise session or a fast sprint was caused by lactic acid buildup in your muscles. What's actually happening when we exercise is our body breaks down ATP for energy, and then hydrogen ions are released. So when the oxygen supply to our muscles becomes more limited, our body can't keep up with breaking down the hydrogen ions fast enough. So that buildup of hydrogen ions makes our environment acidic, and that's what causes our muscles to burn. So to make things even more confusing, to delve just a little bit deeper, lactic acid doesn't actually build up from a technical standpoint, but lactate does. So as the intensity increases, then our bodies are going to rely more on glucose to keep up with our energy demands. Those broken down glucose molecules are going to build up along with the hydrogen ions. Each molecule is going to absorb 2 hydrogen ions and form lactate. And now we know that lactate acts as a buffer to the acidic hydrogen ions. And so without it, the accumulation of those hydrogen ions would cause a mechanical failure in our muscles. That leads us to myth number 2. Lactic acid is just waste, and it's what causes fatigue. Not only does lactate serve as a buffer, research indicates that our bodies reuse the lactate as a source of energy for our muscles, our heart, and our brain. So during moderate and hard exercise, it can be shuttled back into the mitochondria of our muscle cells. Those are the energy compartments that are inside your cells, and they convert it into energy. So some lactate goes to the liver and it forms more glucose. It's kind of a continuous cycle within the body. It's estimated that about 75% of lactate produced inside the muscle cells is going to be recycled into glucose and used as fuel. So it's definitely not going to waste within your body. Lactate can also help delay muscle fatigue rather than cause it. During long runs, your muscles are going to lose power because they are going to become depolarized. The accumulation of lactate in your muscle tissue is going to help partly to counteract the effect of depolarization within the cells in your muscles. And that brings us to myth number 3 about lactic acid, that lactic acid causes muscle soreness. Lactate actually clears out of your system 30 minutes to an hour after working out, and the majority of it is going to be recycled and turned back into energy. Delayed onset muscle soreness, it's also referred to as DOMS, is the result of microtrauma in the muscles. They're tiny little tears in your muscles and connective tissues that cause inflammation. Most exercise is going to give you at least some little bit of soreness, but exercise with a big emphasis on lengthening plays a significant role in how sore you're going to get a day or two after a hard workout. So now that we know all of this about lactic acid or lactate, how can we use this as runners? Well, to improve your racing, you need to do workouts that increase your lactate transport potential. You might have heard these mentioned before: anaerobic threshold run, a ventilatory threshold run, a lactate threshold run, a lactate turn point run. We now know that lactate accumulates in a smooth, regular fashion as your exercise intensity increases. So there's no actual threshold or turn point or onset. Lactate threshold pace has been the preferred term that most runners have used for the last handful or so of years. Loosely speaking, a lactate threshold pace requires a hard but manageable effort, and it forces your body to begin producing considerably more lactate. And when you train at lactate threshold pace, your body conditions itself to move lactate around the body, and that improves your performance at distances from the mile to the marathon. So what is a lactate training pace? It's more or less your 5K pace plus about 20 to 40 seconds per mile, or your 10K pace plus about 10 to 20 seconds per mile. Both formulas there should result in somewhere around the same pace. Most top coaches are going to recommend that you do 20 to 40 minute runs at your lactate threshold pace. These usually are called tempo runs, or they're sometimes referred to as tempo training. So if you see that coming up on your training plan, you know what that means. To build your lactate system, what you want to do is have a lot of variety in your running program. Now, on some days you'll run your tempo pace for 20 minutes or more. On other days you may run shorter, faster workouts. Push yourself to the point where you are moderately uncomfortable, then recover, and then push again. Now, these workouts are going to help increase lactate transport ability within your body, and with any luck, you won't have to suffer from cement legs in the long run again. If you found this video useful, why don't you let me know by dropping a comment down below and let me know what you think. You can also subscribe if you haven't already. Make sure that you hit that subscribe button and hit the bell icon so that you can be notified every time that I update, which happens several times a week. You can also follow me on social media. All the links are down in the description. You can find me across most platforms under the name Running Geek Girl. Thank you so much for being here. I'm so glad you could join me. Let me know what else you would like to know about, and I will see you in the next video. Happy running. So,